A woman vanishes, leaving only saffron silence and suspicion behind. Welcome to Sayers and Secrets. I am your host, Samuel Drake. Tell me where in the world you're watching from. I always read them all. It means a lot having you here for this one. Now, the case begins. You could tell something was off from the first ring of the bell, not the usual kind of off, wrong address, wrong day, wrong side of a nervous breakdown, but the rare kind where you know before opening the door that whatever this is, it's going to be trouble, and not the punch-throwing kind either. The thinking kind. The kind that curls under your collar and settles in for a long stay. I was in the front room, halfway through a glass of Fritz's raspberry shrub and a reread of the Post crossword. Thursdays are when they really try to trip you, when the chimes sounded. Not fast, not frantic. Just two presses spaced perfectly apart, like someone with a lot of self-control, but very little time. I opened the door and found a man in a tan trench coat, neatly pressed, not a speck of rain on him, despite the storm that had swept through Manhattan that morning. Mid-30s, copper wire glasses, and a haircut that suggested either a military background or expensive denial. He looked past me into the brownstone, like he'd arrived for something important, something promised. "Archie Goodwin?" he asked. I gave him my best smile. "That depends on whether you're here to sell me magazine subscriptions or trouble." "Neither," he said, reaching into his inside pocket. "I'm Curtis Abbott. I'm here on behalf of my sister. I need to speak to Mr. Wolfe." He pulled out a folded note, not a business card, not a letter, just a single sheet of hotel stationery. The good kind, from the Broadhurst on 81st. Top corner is marked, Suite 42. I took it, but didn't unfold it right away. "Mr. Abbott, I hate to be the one to break it to you, but Nero Wolfe does not see clients before noon, unless someone is dying, or something has been stolen, or Fritz's salt block has been tampered with. This qualifies," he said. He didn't blink, didn't fidget. Just stood there, holding his silence like a badge. I cracked the note. It was short. No salutation. No signature. Just 5 words in clean, slanted script. He left everything behind. J. I looked back up. "Your sister is J. Julia Abbott. And she's at Broadhurst?" She was. When I arrived this morning, the door was locked from the inside. The security latch was set, but she wasn't there. Maybe she went out the window. "She's on the 5th floor. I gave him a longer look. He didn't seem like the hysterical type. His coat was dry, but his shoes had a trace of salt from the sidewalk. I'd bet even odds he'd spent the better part of the morning circling questions he didn't want to answer out loud. I glanced down at the note again. 5 words, but they had the weight of something personal. "Wait here," I said. "I'll ask the mountain if he's willing to rumble." I left him in the vestibule and headed upstairs. Wolfe was in the plant room, tending to a stubborn phalaenopsis that had refused to open since last week. He didn't turn when I entered. "Another morning, another mystery," I said. "This one involves a woman vanishing from a locked hotel suite." That got him. He straightened half an inch, his version of a double take. "Go on," he said. "Curtis Abbott. He says his sister Julia disappeared, left the door locked from the inside, hotel suite. No sign of departure, and she left everything behind. A crime? Unclear. Violence? None reported. Police? Not yet. He came to you first." Wolfe sighed. "For what?" "Presumably your brilliance." He finally turned. "Bring him in." "And the note." I returned to the vestibule. "You're in. Keep your voice down. Don't sit unless told, and if you've brought anything that could stain the rug, leave it on the stoop." Abbott followed me to the office, like a man used to rules, but unused to explaining himself. When he stepped into Wolfe's line of sight, he straightened again. Wolfe gestured toward the red chair. "Mr. Abbott, your sister has disappeared." Yes, sir. Wolfe motioned for the note, which I handed over. He read it once, then again. This was written by your sister. Yes. Left in the suite. In the wastebasket. Crumpled. But legible. Wolfe tapped a finger on the armrest. Tell me exactly what you found. Abbott took a breath. Julia and I are twins. We've been close since childhood. She's been staying at the Broadhurst for the past 2 weeks. She arrived from Seattle. She's an interior designer. Had meetings with a client uptown. Yesterday she called me. She said she'd found something wrong. I asked what she meant. She said she couldn't explain it yet. Then the line was cut off. And this morning, I arrived at the hotel at 9. I knocked. No answer. I convinced the staff to let me in. The latch was set from the inside. They had to bring in a master key and a tool to release it. When we entered, the room was empty. No sign of her. No forced entry. Her suitcase was there. Her coat. Her purse. Even her phone. But no Julia. Wolfe closed his eyes. And no note. Except this one. That's all. The staff didn't know she'd left. No one saw her leave. No security footage shows her exiting the building. Wolfe was silent for a moment. Then, is there anyone in her life who would wish her gone? Abbott hesitated. There's a man, Peter Holden. She met him in New York last year. He's controlling. She ended things 2 months ago. He didn't take it well. Could he have lured her out of the room? I don't know. She was careful, cautious. But this, she wouldn't just vanish. And she wouldn't leave that note if she wasn't scared. Wolfe passed the note back to me. He left everything behind. He repeated. Curious phrasing. Not ein. Not we. I said. Maybe she wasn't alone. Wolfe opened his eyes. Possibly. Or she found something. Someone. And had to act quickly. Abbott leaned forward. You'll take the case. Wolfe didn't answer right away. He looked at the orchids beyond the glass, then back to the man in the chair. Yes, he said. Though not for the reason you expect. Then why? Because disappearances, Wolfe said, are never about escape. They are about control, and I detest being controlled. He turned to me. Archie, you will go to Broadhurst. Speak to the manager. Inspect the suite. Interview the staff. And bring back everything they don't want us to see. Abbott exhaled. Relief visible. And you? He asked Wolfe. Wolfe said, will remain here as always. He reached for the bell to summon Fritz. The game, as they say, was afoot. The Broadhurst Hotel had a reputation for discretion, starched linen, and doormen who could make eye contact with a ghost and still not write it in the logbook. It was one of those places where nobody asked questions unless the answer came with a retainer. The kind of building where secrets weren't spilled, they were scheduled. I arrived just after 2, wearing my best smirk and a coat that still had a little Wolfe cigar ash on the shoulder. The lobby was full of quiet money and slow jazz. Behind the reception desk stood a clerk with the expression of a man who'd once been trained in crisis response, but had never needed to use it until now. I approached and flipped open my wallet, showing Wolfe's embossed card. Archie Goodwin, investigator, working with Mr. Nero Wolfe. I'd like to speak to the manager about a recent incident in Suite 42. The clerk blinked once. 1 moment, please. He vanished behind a velvet curtain. 2 minutes later, he returned with a man in his early 60s, trim, polished, with a voice that had been trained on boarding school syllables. I'm Lionel Pritchard, the general manager. I understand there's some concern involving one of our guests. There is, I said. Julia Abbott disappeared from her locked room. The door was latched from the inside. You probably remember it. Of course. Mr. Abbott was understandably upset. But there was no sign of forced entry, and our logs Logs can lie, I said. I'm not here to blame. Just to ask. Pritchard didn't smile, but he nodded. Of course. We pride ourselves on cooperation. Please follow me. He led me to an elevator tucked behind a column, separate from the main one. The kind they use for guests with names or problems. We rode up in silence. Suite 42 was at the end of the 5th floor corridor. The hallway smelled of furniture polish and imported soap. The door was closed, newly fitted with a temporary latch. This was replaced this morning, Pritchard said. Standard procedure. No sign of breakage, but we didn't want to leave it unsecured. He handed me a key. I opened the door. Inside, the suite was tastefully furnished. Modern, soft beige walls, armchairs in navy velvet, and a small writing desk in the corner. The lights were off, but daylight filtered in through gauzy curtains. It looked lived in, but barely. A coat on the back of a chair, an open cosmetics bag on the counter, a phone on the nightstand, plugged in but powered off. I circled the room slowly. Wolfe had taught me that the key wasn't what was there, it was what wasn't. Her suitcase was packed but unzipped, half full. A copy of The Goldfinch sat face down on the dresser. No notes, no bookmarks. The closet held 2 dresses, a sweater and a tote bag. The bathroom was clean, but the towel on the rack was damp. Someone had used it. Recently, the desk drawer had paper, hotel stationery, and a small brass pen. I checked the wastebasket. Empty, too empty. Does your staff clean this room? I asked. No, Pritchard replied. We were told not to touch anything. Yet the basket is empty. He frowned. That's not standard. No, it's not. I turned to the nightstand. A glass of water sat half drunk. I sniffed it. No scent. Then I picked up the phone. No texts, no missed calls. But in the email app was a single draft. Untitled. Just one line. I don't know who he is, but he knows my name. I read it 3 times. I turned to Pritchard. Who has access to this floor? Only guests and cleaning staff. And security, if summoned. Who was on duty last night? He checked a leather-bound notebook he carried like a nervous priest. Angela Reyes and Victor De Soto. They rotated at midnight. Where can I find them? Angela's downstairs now. Victor is off until tonight. I'll start with her. Angela Reyes was in her early 20s, with a ponytail, pressed uniform, and an expression that warned you she'd seen more than she ever intended to in this job. I met her in the service corridor, near the laundry room. I just want the truth, I told her, not looking to blame anyone. She looked at me, arms folded. Julia Abbott. She was nice, quiet, polite. Did you see her yesterday? Early afternoon. She asked for fresh towels and more tea. Seemed distracted. How so? Look past me. Not at me. Like she was trying to remember something behind me. Did anyone come to visit her? Angela hesitated. Not that I saw, but I heard voices. When? Late. Maybe midnight. I was on break, near the elevator. Heard a man's voice outside her door. What did he say? I couldn't make it out. Just tone. Not yelling. Not soft either. Confident. Did you tell anyone? I told Victor. He shrugged it off. And security footage. She looked apologetic. Only the lobby and elevators. Not guest floors. Of course not. I thanked her and returned to the suite. Back in the office that evening, I gave Wolfe the full rundown. He listened with his eyes closed, as if painting the entire scene in his head. When I finished, he opened his eyes. The wastebasket is the pivot, he said. You think something else was there? No. I think something was removed. A note, a receipt, a piece of correspondence she meant to leave behind but was intercepted. I showed him the phone draft. He read the line aloud. He knows my name. Then he tapped the paper gently. She was afraid, he said. But of what? Of someone she didn't know. No, she knew him, just not who he really was. I nodded. Then our next step. Find Peter Holden. If she fears him, he is our first illumination. I rose. And Curtis. Ask him to return tomorrow morning. I have questions for him that only siblings can answer. Wolfe turned to the globe, spinning it once with a flick of his fingers. Outside, the city was shifting into nighttime. Inside, the brownstone wasn't quiet anymore. It had been disturbed, and Wolfe for once was letting it happen. Curtis Abbott returned the next morning, dressed the same, looking slightly less crisp but no less composed. Wolfe had summoned him for a character clarification, which translated from Wolfe's vocabulary, meant he was ready to start pulling threads, and he wanted to know which ones were silk and which were rope. Abbott took the red chair without prompting this time. Fritz brought coffee, which he didn't touch. Wolfe didn't ask about the weather. He never does when the question on the table is who had a reason to make a woman vanish. Abbott, Wolfe began. Yesterday you mentioned a man named Peter Holden. You implied he and your sister had a prior relationship. Curtis nodded. They met last fall during one of her longer New York trips. He was charming, attentive, then possessive, controlling. He wanted to invest in her business, but it came with strings. Julia turned him down. After that, he kept showing up, uninvited. Once, she found him sitting in the lobby of her apartment building in Seattle, just waiting. A stalker then? I asked. Not legally, Abbott replied. No restraining order, nothing overt, but yes, the pattern fits. Wolfe tapped his fingers. What does he do? He's in finance, or claims to be. No office address, but plenty of expensive suits. One of those men who always has a story, and never leaves a footprint. Was he aware Julia was in New York again? Curtis frowned. That, I don't know. She didn't mention him when she arrived, and I didn't ask. Wolfe leaned back. Very well. Now tell me who else might have been in contact with her here. Curtis thought. There's a client, Daphne Chilton, high profile, old money. Julia had been reworking her Fifth Avenue apartment. They had a meeting 2 days before she disappeared. It was postponed twice, which annoyed Julia. She wasn't sure Daphne actually wanted the job done, just liked having someone on call. She saw Miss Chilton regularly, 3 times that week, and did she ever mention tension between them? Julia thought Daphne liked the attention. The project wasn't about redecorating, it was about control. Julia didn't like being treated like staff. Wolfe nodded. Next, there was someone else, a man she only referred to as the patron. I raised an eyebrow. What kind of title is that? Curtis shrugged. I asked. She said he was a collector, someone she met through Daphne. He was interested in design work, rare materials, and antique finishes. She never gave his name, just said he was eccentric, exacting, and vaguely threatening. Threatening how? She wouldn't say. Just that something about the way he spoke made her skin crawl. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. She continued seeing him. She was supposed to meet him the night before she vanished. And you don't know his name? No. Did she ever describe him? Only vaguely. Tall, older, a bit theatrical, British maybe. I jotted that down. Wolfe folded his hands. That makes 4, he said. Yourself, Mr. Holden, Miss Chilton, and the unnamed patron. Me? Curtis blinked. Surely not. Wolfe didn't lift his gaze. You brought the case. You had access. You discovered the note. If we are to proceed methodically, All angles must be considered. Curtis said nothing to that, just sat back in the chair and crossed one ankle over the other. Wolfe turned to me. Archie, you will begin with Peter Holden. Determine his current location and whether he has made any contact with Miss Abbott in the past 7 days. Then Miss Chiltern, and finally attempt to identify the patron. Any instructions beyond the usual? Yes, Wolfe said. Use tact with Miss Chiltern. She will expect flattery. With Holden, use caution. He will expect none. I was out the door before noon. The first stop was Holden. His last known address was a rental on the Upper East Side, a townhouse split into 3 units. I spoke to the building manager, a gruff man who treated tenants like squatters. Holden, he said, scratching his chin. Yeah, he was here. Moved out 2 weeks ago. Left early. Paid cash for the last month. Did he leave a forwarding address? Nope. Anything odd about his departure? The manager shrugged. Didn't like questions. Kept weird hours. Got a lot of calls but never answered them in front of me. I passed him a 10. Any visitors? He thought. There was one guy, mid-30s, blonde, wore gloves, even indoors. Came twice. Waited in the hallway for Holden to come out. Gloves in July. Exactly. Did you catch his name? No, but he called Holden Petey. Like they were close. Or pretending. I thanked him and moved on. Holden had a digital trail, just barely. I called Lon Cohen, and got a hit. Someone matching Holden's description had checked into a business-class hotel in Long Island City under the name Peter H. Dawson. Alias, obviously, but it gave us a timeline. I called the hotel, posed as a billing agent, and got confirmation that Mr. Dawson had checked out the morning after Julia vanished. Too close to be a coincidence. I logged that, then headed to my second stop, Daphne Chiltern. Her address was on 5th, just as Curtis had said. The kind of building with a uniformed doorman, who looked like he used to train race horses, and now opened doors for people who bought paintings with titles. Miss Chiltern answered the door herself. Daphne Chiltern was money. The kind that didn't need explaining. Mid-50s, white blonde hair, a robe that probably cost more than my week's salary, and an expression like she'd been forced to wake up from something beautiful, just to deal with something boring. Mr. Goodwin, she said, scanning me, like I might spill on the rug. Julia sent you. Not quite, I said. She's gone missing. Her brother asked us to help. Missing. Her voice didn't break. How dramatic. She had a meeting scheduled with you. You cancelled. I postponed. Twice. She was intense. Professional, yes, but also very serious. It made her tired. You introduced her to someone. A collector. She paused. Mr. Lammers. First name. I never asked. He's not the type. Old world. Cigars and stories and precise opinions. He took an interest in her use of Venetian plaster. Where can I find him? I have his assistant's number. She scribbled it on a card and handed it over. He doesn't take calls, but she does. I thanked her and turned to go. She was brilliant, you know, Chiltern said behind me. You're Julia. Brilliant, but not built for subtlety. That stuck with me. Back at the brownstone, I laid it all out. Wolfe sat through it like a man watching slow-moving weather. Interested, but not hurried. When I finished, he closed his eyes. Peter Holden lied about leaving town. He was in New York the night Julia vanished. He used an alias, yes. And Lammers, a mystery. But I have the assistant's number. Call it. Set a meeting. And Holden. We will send Saul Panzer to find him. Wolfe opened his eyes. We are close to the pivot, Archie. I didn't ask what he meant, because I could already feel it, too. Whatever had happened in Suite 42 was more than a disappearance. It was a move on a board we hadn't yet seen. And someone, somewhere, was still playing. By the time you've worked for Wolfe as long as I have, you get a feel for what matters. Not just who said what or when. It's who didn't say it, and who had too many words rehearsed. And when a woman like Julia Abbott disappears from a locked hotel room and leaves behind 5 cryptic words, there's no such thing as coincidence, only orchestration. Wolfe had tasked Saul with tracing Peter Holden's movements, and Saul, who could follow a ghost through fog, was already on the trail. That left me with the second name on our suspect list, the elusive patron finally given a surname by Daphne Chilton. Lammers. The card Chilton had scribbled on was perfumed, naturally. The number belonged to a woman named Irina Wick. I dialed it from the phone in Wolfe's office, and made my voice just the right balance of respectful and inquisitive. "Miss Wick," I said when she answered, her voice husky and clipped. "My name is Archie Goodwin. I'm investigating the disappearance of Julia Abbott. I believe you're the assistant to Mr. Lammers, someone she was scheduled to meet last week." There was a long pause, then a slow, controlled, "Yes, I am aware of Miss Abbott. Would it be possible to speak with Mr. Lammers?" "Impossible," she replied. "Mr. Lammers doesn't meet uninvited." "That may be," I said, "but this isn't an invitation. It's a concern. Miss Abbott is missing." She referenced a meeting with him shortly before her disappearance. "I think he may be able to help." "I doubt he can," she said. "But if you insist, come to the Benedict building. 5th floor west elevator. Noon." She hung up without a goodbye. I told Wolfe. He nodded without looking up from his orchid log. She expected the call, and yet she rehearsed her denial. At 5 to noon, I walked into the Benedict building and took the west elevator up. The 5th floor was quiet. One frosted glass door bore the letters, A. Lammers, Private Design Consult. I knocked. The door opened precisely on the 3rd tap. Irina Wick was tall, angular, and dressed like she belonged on the cover of an architectural digest. Her suit was navy, her glasses were gold-rimmed, her handshake was clipped and brief. "Goodwin, this way." She led me into a study that looked more like a museum than an office. Rugs from Manitolia, framed sketches of columns, and a scent of sandalwood in the air. And there at the far end of the room, seated beneath a Turkish lamp, was the patron himself, Alistair Lammers. He looked like a set piece from a war film, grey temples, trimmed beard, a walking stick resting beside his leather chair. But the eyes were alert, too alert. He didn't get up. "Mr. Goodwin," he said. "Please, sir. I understand you're here about Miss Abbott." "I am. I imagine you suspect I had something to do with her disappearance." "I don't suspect," I said. "I ask, and I listen." Very wise, he poured tea. Didn't offer me any. A small gesture that told me exactly how much I was supposed to feel welcome. "She was talented," Lammers said. "Impatient, but talented. Her attention to surface detail was unmatched, but her grasp of deeper context was less developed. She didn't impress you. She challenged me," he said. "And I don't care for that." She was opinionated. I like silence from my collaborators. I kept my expression flat. "What was the nature of your last meeting?" He set the cup down with the kind of care you reserve for Fabergé eggs. "She brought samples. Wood veneer, plasterwork." I expressed my dissatisfaction. She responded with frustration. "Did it end badly?" He considered. "No. It ended with her saying, 'You don't own this story.' Then she left." "You expected her back?" "No. I assumed she'd moved on." I stood. "Did you know Peter Holden?" Lammers paused. That gave me more than his words ever would. "No," he said. "Too fast." I thanked him, left a card, and exited. Out in the hallway, I let my thoughts line up. Lammers was lying about something. Maybe not the disappearance itself, but his role in the days leading up to it. If I had to guess, I'd say he'd hoped to recruit Julia, then realized she wasn't moldable. Someone like him wouldn't kidnap a woman. He'd try to erase her professionally, silencing by reputation. Back at the brownstone, I reported it all to Wolfe, who took it in with his usual silence. Then he asked, "Describe the room." I did. "The rug," he said. "Color?" "Red, patterned, old." "Did it extend beneath Lammer's chair?" I paused. "No." "Stopped just in front of it." Then he moved it. "Recently. He's hiding something." Wolfe stood. That in itself meant something. He did not kidnap Miss Abbott, but he spoke with someone who had already made plans to do so. "Who?" "That," Wolfe said, "depends on Saul's findings." As if on cue, the phone rang. I picked it up. Saul Panzer's voice came through, low and even. "Got him." "Halden." "The name's fake, as you guessed." I followed him from a deli in Queens to a brownstone on 139th, third floor unit. No roommates. And get this, he left today with a suitcase. Checked into a hostel near Port Authority. Running. Definitely. The kicker, he's been sending letters, handwritten, mailed at different locations. To whom? Don't know yet. But I pulled one from a trash bin near the mailbox, torn. But the address is partially legible. I copied it. "Get me the rest," I said. That night, Wolfe examined the scrap. The recipient's name was illegible, but part of the address was there, East 73rd Street, apartment 3B. The handwriting matched the style on Julia's note. "She didn't write that alone," Wolfe said. "Or she was copying someone else's hand." I looked at him. "Are you saying Halden wrote the note Julia left behind?" "I am saying Halden was in the room after she left. And he wanted us to think she wrote it." That changed everything. We were no longer looking for a missing woman. We were looking for a manipulated story. And the author was getting nervous. Wolfe closed his eyes. "Tomorrow, we will visit Mr. Halden. And we ask, not what he saw, but what he changed." If you've never seen Nero Wolfe solve a case from behind a desk, let me paint you a picture. Imagine a general who never leaves his tent but manages to send entire armies into retreat. Add orchids, beer, and a few thousand words a day, and you've got the full canvas. That morning, Wolfe sat with his hands steepled, eyes half shut, and the mood of a man who had just spotted a shadow cast in the wrong direction. The previous night's revelation, that Peter Halden may have forged the note found in Julia Abbott's hotel suite, had changed the tempo of the investigation. Wolfe had warned me years ago that disappearance cases are rarely about the vanishing itself. They're about the stage left behind, props, lighting and all. This one had been carefully dressed. At 9:40 a.m., I stood in front of the brownstone on 139th Street that Saul had staked out. It had the look of a building that had survived better decades, chipped stone steps, windows that needed cleaning, and a buzzer system that wheezed more than it rang. I rang Unit 3, no answer. So I tried another route, buzzed the superintendent, gave my name, and explained that I was following up on a missing persons case. That got the lock to buzz, and I took the stairs two at a time, landing at Halden's apartment door, listening. No sound. I knocked anyway, still no answer, but the knob gave slightly under pressure, not open. Just loose, like someone had left it half-latched and walked away in a hurry. I didn't force it. Not without cause. Back downstairs, I found the super smoking in the alley. "Guy in 3, he said, when I asked. "Left in a rush yesterday. He said he had a job out west. Didn't leave a forwarding address. Did he get any packages? Letters? Couple. He always had a habit of checking his mail late, sometimes 3, 4 in the morning. That lined up with Saul's observations. Paranoid, nocturnal, and always watching his back. I left a card with the super, and asked him to call if Haldon returned. Then I headed downtown. At the brownstone, Wolfe was in his chair, sipping beer at 11:06 sharp. He listened to my report, and frowned at the mention of the half-latched door. That, he said, is trespass. Subtle, but deliberately. Could have been the super checking the unit after he left. Wolfe shook his head. No. A superintendent would have used a pass key and closed the door behind him. This was left half secure, for possible return. To what? To remove or retrieve something inconvenient. Like what? Wolfe held up the fragment of the envelope Saul had found. A letter Julia never received, or one she sent. Just then, the phone rang. I picked it up. It was Saul. Haldon didn't get on a bus. He doubled back. He's in Jersey, cheap motel, under another alias. Name this time is Henry Elkin. I can intercept him if you want. Not yet, I said. Just keep your eyes on him. We may need him to lead us somewhere. I hung up and relayed the update. Wolfe grunted. He is circling, not fleeing. That tells us he's uncertain, possibly improvising. At that moment, Fritz entered the office with his usual tact, and something unusual in his voice. Mr. Wolfe, he said. I believe something is missing from the cabinet. Wolfe blinked once. My condiments, he asked. Fritz nodded. The saffron tin, Spanish. From Madrid. I used it 3 days ago for soup. Today, gone. Wolfe sat forward. The spice cabinet is alphabetized. Was it rearranged? Yes, Fritz said, carefully. A few jars were moved, slightly out of line. Only someone familiar with your kitchen could have accessed it unnoticed. I looked at Wolfe. You think it's connected? Yes. Because nothing in this house ever vanishes on its own. And because the saffron was kept in a brass tin. I caught it immediately. Like the one in Julia's hotel suite. Wolfe nodded. A match. Too neat to ignore. I turned to Fritz. Who's been in the kitchen lately? Other than us? Fritz folded his arms. Delivery men. A cleaner for the window service. No one. I didn't check at the door. Could they have palmed it? If they were looking for it, he said. Yes. I turned back to Wolfe. So someone took the saffron tin from here to substitute for Julia's. Or, Wolfe replied. Someone brought the one from her suite here and swapped it to mislead us. Which means, someone has been inside this brownstone, without permission, and with intent, that shut us both up. It took a lot to get under Wolfe's skin, but someone slipping past our defenses, tampering with evidence, or trying to erase it, that was an offense on multiple fronts, strategic, psychological, personal. I will need to examine the tin, Wolfe said. Too late, I reminded him. It's gone. He looked down at his beer, as if it had just betrayed him. Then we must work backward. By that afternoon, I'd returned to the Broadhurst Hotel. With Wolfe's permission, I asked Pritchard if anyone else had been in Suite 42 since the initial investigation. His answer, yes. A gentleman claiming to be from the State Licensing Board said he was performing a routine check on guest security protocols. I had an ID, badge and clipboard. We let him in. Name: Edward Loomis. I didn't need to call anyone to know that it was fake. How long was he inside? 10 minutes. Left without saying much. I asked for security footage. They gave it to me. When I played it back in Wolfe's office that evening, he watched in silence as a tall, gloved man in a charcoal coat entered the elevator at 2:14 p.m. and exited 12 minutes later, carrying a slim briefcase. Haldon. He'd returned to the scene. He took something, Wolfe said. The saffron tin, or the original, which means he was in Julia's room twice. Yes, once to set the stage, once to dismantle it. But why the tin? Wolfe stared at the screen. Because something was inside it. I nodded. Like a letter, or a note, possibly a flash drive. Something small, hidden, easily passed off as culinary clutter. And now, Wolfe said. He's trying to eliminate it. But he doesn't know what Julia told her brother, or what she might have mailed. Which means he's panicking. Wolfe's eyes were sharp now, focused. Which means we pressure him. I stood. Saul. Wolfe nodded. Tell him to approach. Softly. Let Holden run. Once. And then, Wolfe said. We listen. He turned back to the orchid journal, as if that settled everything. Outside the brownstone silence returned. But inside, someone had trespassed. And Wolfe was about to make sure they didn't do it twice. You don't corner a man like Peter Holden, with threats or noise. You let him feel safe. You let him think he's just far enough ahead of the game to get lazy. Then when his footing slips, you make sure he lands in the one place he can't talk his way out of, Nero Wolfe's chair. At 9:17 the next morning, Saul Panzer called. He moved again. Saul said. Checked out of the motel in Jersey before dawn. Hopped a cab into the city. He's at a cafe on Columbus, watching the street. Waiting for someone. I asked. Or hiding from someone. You said Wolfe wanted pressure, Saul added. Are you ready to squeeze? I looked across the office at Wolfe, who hadn't spoken in 15 minutes but was clearly listening. Saul, I said. Approach gently. Let him feel your shadow, not your hand. Give him 10 minutes to make a decision. Then introduce yourself. Got it, Saul said. I'll let you know when he bolts. And bolt he did. 15 minutes later, the phone rang again. He's heading west. Fast. No cab. On foot. I have a bag. Looks like he's trying to shake me. Follow at a distance, Wolfe instructed from his chair. Do not engage. Let him arrive where he thinks he's safe. Saul did. And by 11:20, we had a location. An apartment building in Hell's Kitchen. 4 floors, fire escape, no doorman. Holden entered through the front and disappeared up the stairs. Wolfe tapped a finger on his chair arm. He will either retrieve the missing item, or attempt to destroy it, he said. Either way he will not stay long. We waited. Saul waited. And then an hour later, the real break came. He left the building, Saul reported. Didn't see me. But guess who arrived 2 minutes before he walked out? Try me. Lammer's assistant. Irena Wick. Same coat. Same gold glasses. She used the fire escape. I caught her leaving from the alley. That landed like a dropped piano in the office. Now we're getting somewhere, I said. Wolfe opened his eyes, slow and deliberate. The connection is no longer speculation. Holden and Lammers, I said. What's the relationship? An arrangement, Wolfe replied. Lammers had a motive. Holden had nerves. Miss Abbott was the obstacle, and Julia's disappearance, a consequence. Now we needed confirmation. I left to intercept Holden myself while Saul looped back to Wick's known address. Wolfe stayed behind, directing calls and prepping what I could only assume would become a masterful trap once the final pieces clicked. Holden was easy enough to spot. He had ducked into a record store on 45th. He was leafing through vinyl, with the sort of focus that says, if I look busy enough, no one will think I'm being hunted. I leaned next to him at the jazz section, and spoke without looking up. Bet you're not even a monk guy. Holden flinched, barely. Excuse me, you don't listen to jazz. You collect it. There's a difference. He closed the record and turned toward me. Mr. Goodwin. That's right. Are you arresting me? Not my job. But I did come with an invitation. Wolfe would like a word. He hesitated. Why now? Because Wolfe knows you didn't write that note in the hotel room for Julia. And because your little saffron switcheroo got sloppy. You brought something out, then came back to clean it up. Classic panic behavior. His face froze, then thawed into something like resignation. What does he want from me? The truth, and your presence. In that order. He exhaled. Fine. 1 hour. At his office. I nodded and left him standing there. By the time I returned to the brownstone, Wolfe was already orchestrating the next phase. Irena Wick had been followed to a brownstone uptown, rented by a shell company owned by a Lammers family trust. I gave Wolfe the news. They've been playing both ends. Holden takes care of the dirt. Wick relays. Lammers stays clean. Predictable, Wolfe said, but incomplete. At what point do we bring in the police? Not yet. Then what's the plan? Wolfe folded his hands. We will escalate, methodically. The goal is no longer discovery. It is unraveling. At 2 o'clock sharp, Peter Holden arrived. He entered the brownstone like a man stepping into a confessional. Wolfe didn't stand. Holden didn't sit until told. I stood behind him, arms crossed. You know who I am, Wolfe said. You know what I represent. And you know you've already lost control of this narrative. What I need from you now is precision. And speed. Holden leaned forward. If I speak, I want assurances. You will have none, Wolfe said. But I will listen. That was enough. Holden's story came out in slow, bitter threads. Yes, he had known Julia. Yes, he had followed her. Yes, he had entered her hotel room after she left. The note, his handwriting, the tin, a decoy. The real object had been a flash drive, tucked inside the spice tin, that Julia intended to deliver to someone she trusted. What was on it? Wolfe asked. Audio, Holden said. A conversation. Between her and Lammers. What kind of conversation? Lammers admitted he'd hired someone to discredit a former client. He named names. It was blackmail. Julia recorded it. She said it proved Lammers had a pattern of intimidation. Why did she confide in you? She didn't. I found out by accident. Read a message she left open. I panicked. Told Irena. She told Lammers. And then. They wanted the drive. I said I could get it. I waited for her to leave. She always did late-night walks. I entered, found the tin, but I wasn't fast enough. When I returned for cleanup, someone had already been there. Who? I don't know. Wolfe's face remained unreadable. Where is Julia now? Holden looked down. Safe, I think. She knew they'd come after her. She left me a voicemail after disappearing. Blocked number. She said she was leaving town. Didn't say where. And the drive. I gave it to Irena. There it was. Wolfe nodded once. You will not contact Miss Wick, nor Lammers, nor anyone else. You will remain available. Is that clear? Holden nodded, then fled. The silence that followed felt earned. Wolfe tapped the arm of his chair. The pressure is now theirs. What happens next? We invite Miss Wick to an engagement. And Lammers. He will come. When summoned. I leaned back. You've got the board. You've got the players. You've got the motive. Yes, Wolfe said. Now I want the truth. Not pieces of it. Outside, the afternoon deepened. Inside, the circle was closing. The final play was near. Some men lay traps with rope and bait. Nero Wolfe used language, timing, and the subtle alignment of facts like a clockmaker setting springs. His method of attack was never direct. He didn't lunge. He leaned, until the truth had nowhere left to rest but in the open. The morning after Holden's confession, Wolfe was silent through breakfast, and mostly unresponsive through lunch. That's how I knew something was brewing. By 3 o'clock, the brownstone was no longer still. Wolfe issued instructions with the precision of a conductor preparing his final movement. "Archie," he said, "you will call Irena Wick and invite her here at 8 tonight. Do not imply urgency, only exclusivity. Mention that her name has come up in a professional context, and that Wolfe himself wishes to speak to her privately." I jotted it all down. "And Lammers, he will be summoned after she arrives, not before. Won't that raise suspicion?" "Suspicion is the point," Wolfe said. "But not hers, his." I made the call. Miss Wick answered on the second ring, her voice as smooth and polished as always. "Mr. Goodwin," she said, "has another spice tin gone missing?" "No, ma'am. But your name has been mentioned in a matter of professional significance. Mr. Wolfe would appreciate a few minutes of your time this evening. Regarding Julia Abbott, among other things." She hesitated, then replied, "Very well. 8 o'clock. After that I called Fritz to prepare the drawing room with seating for 3, Wolfe, Wick, and me. Wolfe's method here wasn't interrogation. It was cultivation. Let her speak. Let her posture. Let her hang herself with confidence." Wolfe also instructed Saul to remain on watch at the Benedict building, just in case Lammers made a move. As for Curtis Abbott, Wolfe told me not to involve him yet, not until the final moment. "The timing must be perfect," he said. "Too early, and the facade strengthens. Too late, and the truth eludes us." At 7:45, the brownstone was in that particular kind of stillness it only held before a confrontation. I took a seat near the door. Wolfe was already in his chair reading nothing, eyes half shut, looking for all the world like he was meditating on soup. At 8:01 sharp, the bell rang. I opened the door. Irena Wick was in navy again, sleek and buttoned, her expression composed but curious. "Right on time," I said. "I will try." She stepped inside like she'd been here before. She hadn't, which made the familiarity even more pointed. In the office, Wolfe didn't rise. She didn't expect him to. "Miss Wick," he said, "thank you for coming." "Mr. Wolfe," she replied, "you have excellent taste in ambiance. It is calibrated for clarity," he said. "Please sit." She did, perching on the edge of the red chair, her bag neatly placed at her side. "I won't waste your time," Wolfe said. "You are acquainted with Peter Holden. You were seen meeting him yesterday at an address in Hell's Kitchen. You were carrying a leather case when you arrived, and not when you left." "I was delivering a document," she said smoothly. "Not yours," Wolfe replied. "Julia Abbott's." She crossed her legs. "That's an assertion." "It is a deduction," Wolfe said, "backed by observation, timing, and your own reaction." She didn't blink. "Why summon me then?" "To test something," Wolfe said, "and to confirm the current position of Mr. Lammers." I leaned in. "Let's be clear, Miss Wick. Julia had a flash drive containing audio that could ruin your employer. Holden said he handed it off to you. Wolfe wants to know if it still exists, and if your game is defense or destruction." She looked at Wolfe. "You think I would act without Lammers' knowledge?" "I think," Wolfe said, "that you are the mind behind the maneuvering."
Lammers is too self-involved. Holden is too reckless. You are the fulcrum. That earned a flicker, a small twitch at the corner of her mouth. And if I am, then you can still choose, Wolfe said. But not for long. The room was silent. Then she opened her bag and pulled out a flash drive. Small, red, unmarked. Holden gave it to me, she said. I listened. It's damning. I told Lammers to destroy it. He refused. Because he doesn't believe it will ever reach the light. And you? I believe, she said, that when someone disappears, someone else always starts talking. She placed the drive on Wolfe's desk. That is a gift, she said. Now may I go? No, Wolfe replied. He rang the buzzer. Fritz appeared, nodded, and stepped out. Moments later, the bell rang again. I opened the door. Alistair Lammers stepped in. He looked tired. His posture slouched. For a man so composed last time, he now seemed reduced. When he entered the office and saw Wick, he froze. Irena, he said. She didn't turn. Alistair, Wolfe said. Thank you for coming. Sit. Lammers sat slowly. This is absurd, he said. No, Wolfe replied. This is theatre, carefully written, and finally arriving at its climax. He turned to me. Play the recording. I loaded the flash drive into Wolfe's player and let it run. The audio was sharp. Julia's voice, calm, then Lammers, louder, arrogant. The line that mattered. I don't care if it's illegal. I care that she stops talking. Lammers went pale. She recorded that without consent, he said. She vanished without consent. I countered. I had nothing to do with that. No, Wolfe said. You only inspired it, encouraged pressure, gave Holden approval to retrieve evidence. It was Miss Wick who warned Julia she was in danger. All eyes turned to her. She stood, quiet. I told her to run, she said. And you let Holden follow, Wolfe added. Lammers stood too. You turned on me. You turned on yourself, she said.
It was done. Wolfe leaned back. You will both remain available for further questioning. Mr. Abbott will decide whether to pursue criminal charges. Lammers opened his mouth. No, Wolfe said. That's enough. I escorted them both out. Back in the office, Wolfe turned to me. Call Curtis Abbott, he said. Tell him his sister is not lost, only hiding, and he now has what he came for. Are you sure Julia's still alive? Yes, Wolfe said, because if she weren't, they'd have used the flash drive for leverage, and that, in the Wolfe world, was reason enough. The trap had closed. All that remained was the final reveal. If you've never seen a Nero Wolfe confrontation in his office, let me tell you, it's not a show, it's a reckoning. Chairs don't get pulled up by accident. Guests don't arrive without orchestration, and every single person sitting under the weight of those stained glass windows knows they're not walking out with their secrets intact. Wolfe doesn't rush these things. He allows them to ferment, and then when the time is right, he opens the bottle and lets the pressure out with one cool, practiced pull of the cork. By 5 o'clock the next evening, all 4 suspects were invited, or in Wolfe speak, requested to appear at 7 p.m. in the office. No further details given. No sense of where they stood. That was key. They arrived almost simultaneously, which was no accident either. Fritz orchestrated it so no one felt too early or too late. Curtis Abbott was the first through the door, quiet, composed, but clearly nursing a question he hadn't yet dared ask aloud. Was his sister still alive? Next came Irena Wolfe, as cool and unreadable as ever. She sat without speaking, eyes resting on the globe in the corner, like it might spin its way into revealing something useful. Then Peter Holden entered, nervous but cleaner than usual. dressed like a man who'd borrowed courage with interest he couldn't afford. He avoided Wyke's gaze. Last, precisely at 7:03, came Alistair Lammers, cane in hand, facing a portrait of reluctant dignity. He nodded once to me, not out of politeness, out of habit. His way of pretending the walls weren't closing in. When everyone was seated, Wolfe didn't start right away. He let the silence sit thick as summer humidity. Then, without lifting his gaze, he spoke. "You all know why you're here," Wolfe said. "You may not know how well I know why you're here. That will change." No one moved. Even Lammers, who'd built a career out of commanding a room with a raised eyebrow, was still. Wolfe looked up, his eyes sharp, but his tone as calm as ever. "We begin with a woman, Julia Abbott. Designer sister, witness. She vanished from Suite 42 at the Broadhurst Hotel last week. Her room was found empty. A note was left behind, in handwriting not hers. Her personal effects were undisturbed, except for one tin of imported saffron, which had been replaced with a match from this house." He glanced at me, and I nodded. "That tin," Wolfe continued, "contained a flash drive, the contents of which were never intended for public ears until they became the only tool left for a woman on the run." Curtis inhaled sharply. "She's alive." Wolfe inclined his head slightly. "Yes. She anticipated this threat. She warned someone close to her, Peter Halden, of what she had. She made contingency plans. And then she vanished." Curtis looked down. I saw something tighten in his shoulders, but he didn't interrupt. "She recorded Alistair Lammers," Wolfe went on, admitting to a pattern of coercive behavior against former clients. "Julia, upon realizing that Lammers had commissioned efforts to discredit and silence others, possibly including her, made a recording. Mr. Halden attempted to steal on Lammers' behalf." Lammers opened his mouth. "No," Wolfe said quietly. "You will wait." The silence after that was sharp. "Miss Wyke," Wolfe continued, "was the broker. She delivered messages, calculated responses, and ultimately received the flash drive. Rather than destroy it immediately, she held it, perhaps out of leverage, perhaps out of conscience. Irina didn't speak. She didn't have to. Her silence was its own admission. Halden looked down at his hands. "I never meant for her to get hurt," he said. "Yet you trespassed," Wolfe said. "Twice. You broke into her suite. You copied her handwriting. You altered the scene to delay suspicion, and you allowed others to believe she had walked out freely." "That wasn't the plan," Halden murmured. "It rarely is," Wolfe replied. "You thought yourself clever. What you did was reckless." He turned to Lammers. "Mr. Lammers, your voice on that recording is unmistakable. The contents are damning. Were Miss Abbott to release it publicly, your reputation, your business, and potentially your freedom would be jeopardized." Lammers remained stiff, chin lifted, but his fingers curled tightly around his cane. "You acted not out of panic, but out of preservation," Wolfe continued. "You engaged Mr. Halden through Miss Wyke. You positioned her as the intermediary. But you misjudged two things: Julia's foresight and my reach." Lammers scoffed. "You expect me to admit guilt because you've gathered 4 people in a room." Wolfe smiled. It wasn't kind. "No. I expect you to listen carefully as I explain what happens next." He gestured slightly toward me, and I opened the envelope Wolfe had given me earlier. Inside were printed transcripts of the audio from the flash drive, 1 copy for each guest. Wolfe didn't offer them around. He just placed them neatly on his desk. "These are unfiled," Wolfe said. "Unreported. Copies exist in 3 locations, 2 beyond my reach. I have no legal jurisdiction, nor do I require any. But I do possess leverage." Lammers snorted. "You think this is extortion?" "No," Wolfe said. "I think this is the conclusion. You will formally issue a statement retracting any professional claims made against Julia Abbott. You will cease all client contact involving your prior affairs. And you will inform your legal counsel that no action shall be taken regarding Miss Abbott or her associates. If I don't, Wolfe's smile returned, then the story will no longer be yours to manage. He let that settle. Curtis, whose silence had been almost monastic until then, finally looked up. My sister, he said. Can I talk to her? She will contact you, Wolfe replied. Once she believes it's safe. I need to know she's okay. She is. Her disappearance was preemptive, not punitive. She fled because she knew what they'd attempt. Curtis nodded. Then I trust her. And you? Lammers stood. This is outrageous. It is inevitable, Wolfe said, and that was that. One by one they filed out. Wyke paused at the threshold. You play a long game, Mr. Wolfe. He didn't look up. Only when it matters. When the door finally clicked shut behind them, the office fell quiet again. Wolfe didn't speak. He just picked up the last copy of the transcript and tossed it into the fire. Symbolism? I asked. Pragmatism, he said. He leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. I dislike unnecessary residue. Outside, the city moved on, unaware of the gathering that had shifted power from one corner of Manhattan to another. Inside the brownstone, the storm had passed. All that remained was the clean air of a game, concluded. A Nero Wolfe case doesn't end when the room clears out. It ends when the last card turns, and Wolfe calls it by name. It was nearly midnight, and the brownstone had gone still again. Outside the city buzzed and blinked its usual lullaby, but inside, Wolfe remained seated, eyes closed, fingers steepled, while I cleaned up the traces of an evening that had pulled back more masks than a masquerade ball at the plaza. Fritz had gone to bed. I had a drink in my hand and a notepad in my lap. Wolfe hadn't spoken in 23 minutes, which for him is a speech. I waited. Then, without opening his eyes, he said, They will scatter now. Halden, Wyke, Lammers. I asked. Yes. But not from guilt. From exposure. None of them expected to reach this far without arrest, but all assumed they could control the narrative. What they underestimated was Julia Abbott. You mean her vanishing act? No, Wolfe said, finally opening his eyes. Her instinct. I leaned forward. You think she saw this coming from the beginning? She saw enough to prepare a contingency. She recorded the conversation, placed it in the one item no one would question, and warned someone she trusted. Not Halden, perhaps not even her brother, but someone. She didn't flee in panic. She withdrew in strategy. Then why the fake note? I asked. Why let Halden dress the scene? Because she needed a delay. Halden was a liability, but he was useful. She counted on his poor judgment to muddy the timeline. That note kept the search pointing outward, not inward. It gave her space. And Lammers, a man whose legacy depends on control, Wolfe said. He built careers by micromanaging people. The moment Julia made herself unpredictable, she became dangerous. He stood up, which meant this was no longer an analysis. It was a declaration. Halden, he continued, was the hinge. He attempted to erase a trail he never fully understood. He broke into the hotel room, swapped the tins, removed the drive, and left a note that would buy them all time. But he failed to realize that time always belongs to the person who sees the full clock. You, I said. No, Julia. Wolfe paced 2 steps, a rare event. She knew they would come looking. She left her brother just enough truth to push him to us. She anticipated that we would see the discrepancies, such as the handwriting, the saffron tin, an item too rare to be left behind, yet not valuable enough to be stolen by a stranger. The exact placement of her bag, shoes and coat, neatly staged, not abandoned. I tapped the notepad.
You said the disappearance was not a crime. It wasn't, Wolfe said. The crime was erased. Lammers and his proxies attempted to bury a voice that contradicted their version of history, and when that failed, they opted for removal. But not murder. Julia was too visible, too connected. What they sought was confusion, discreditation, and silence. And the flash drive made that impossible. Wolfe nodded. Irina Wyke held it, not out of loyalty, but leverage. She knew Lammers would not risk exposure, but she also knew Julia might re-emerge. She was playing both ends, preparing for whichever returned first. I walked to the window and looked down at 35th Street. A cab pulled away from the curb. Somewhere out there, Julia Abbott was alive and watching, probably waiting for Wolfe to confirm it was safe. She's not coming back soon, is she? I asked. No, Wolfe said. But she will, once she knows the recording is no longer needed. I turned back to him. Then what happens to Lammers? He will fall, Wolfe said simply. Not publicly, yet, but the loss of control, of narrative, of secrecy, it will eat away at him. Wyke will distance herself, Holden will disappear again, and Lammers will spend the rest of his life waiting for a knock that never comes. And Curtis Abbott, he will wait. And eventually, he will receive a letter, or a call. Julia will reach out when it's time. Not before, no, Wolfe said. Because truth has weight, and it takes time to carry it alone. He returned to his chair, and closed his eyes again. This case was never about disappearance. It was about narrative ownership. Julia saw herself being edited out, so she rewrote the ending. That line hung in the air for a while. I sat down and let it settle. Sometimes, cases end with arrests. Sometimes, they end with revelations. This one, it ended with restoration. Of agency, of identity, of voice. Wolfe wasn't always sentimental, but when the stakes involved more than money or murder, he allowed himself the rare pause of respect. That's what this was. Respect for a woman who played the long game better than the men who underestimated her. The next morning, a letter arrived. It had no return address, just a New Jersey postmark. Inside was a single card, handwritten in smooth cursive. Thank you for believing the things I didn't get to say. J. Wolfe read it once, then folded it and handed it to me without comment. He reached for the bell and summoned Fritz. Breakfast, he said. The flash drive. Gone. The transcripts. Burned. The tin. Never found again. But the message, that stayed with us. It was Thursday evening, when the brownstone finally felt like itself again, quiet, unbothered, and with no visitors looking like question marks outside the door. Wolfe was in his chair, the orchids had survived their daily worship, and Fritz was in the kitchen braising veal in a sauce he wouldn't tell me about yet. For the first time in nearly a week, nothing was out of place, not even the saffron tin, which had been replaced with one from Wolfe's backup stock, complete with its delicate brass lid and the faint aroma of Spain. Cases like this don't always leave blood behind. Sometimes, they just take up space inside you for a while, like a story unfinished even after the final word. Julia Abbott had disappeared, yes, but not in fear, not in defeat. She'd taken her own pen to a chapter someone else tried to erase, and Wolfe, in his infinite detestation of all things unjust, had made sure her version of the story was the one that remained. I was in the office, feet on the corner of my desk, catching up on notes and staring at the card she'd sent. I hadn't told Wolfe I kept it, but I knew he knew. It was sitting between my Rolodex and the edge of the blotter, angled just enough so I could see her signature. Wolfe, meanwhile, was on his second bottle of beer, and halfway through one of those unreadable treatises on Roman agriculture. He liked to skim while digesting cases. You could always tell when he was actually reading, and when he was using the book as a distraction, while his brain turned something over. This was the latter. "I hope you're not expecting a parade," I said. "There's no big headline on this one." "No," Wolfe replied, not looking up. "Nor would I want one. Publicity ruins appetite. Lammers are quiet. Wyke hasn't been seen in 2 days. Holden might be in Canada by now." "Likely," Wolfe said, "but not relevant." That was his way of saying we'd done what we came to do. And if the players were smart, they'd stay where he left them. Curtis Abbott had dropped by earlier with a small box of pastries and an envelope. The box was Fritz's reward. The envelope was Wolfe's. Inside was a single-page letter, handwritten by Curtis himself. "Mr. Wolfe, I don't know how to thank you. My sister is still silent, but now I understand why. She was never gone. She was just waiting to be heard. You gave her that. Whatever she becomes next, she'll owe part of it to you. And so will I." See, Wolfe hadn't replied. He never did it with gratitude, unless there was a fee involved. But I saw him fold the letter with care, and place it in the lower drawer of his desk, the one where things went when they mattered more than they should. Dinner that night was served at 7 sharp. Veal with a cream and tarragon sauce, saffron rice on the side, and asparagus tips glazed in butter. Wolfe ate with his usual silence, pausing only for beer, or to offer Fritz a satisfied grunt between bites. I didn't talk either, not out of reverence, but because that meal was just that good. After dinner, we returned to the office. Wolfe sat, eyes closed, hands on his stomach like a monk on a marble throne. I knew a comment was coming, and I knew it would be the kind you didn't interrupt. "She disappeared to be remembered," he said at last, "and in so doing, made herself impossible to forget. That was it. No philosophy lecture, no smug epigram, just the one truth that wrapped the case in full. She didn't want justice," I said. "She wanted agency. She wanted the truth to hold," Wolfe replied. We let that settle for a while. Then I got up, stretched, and looked at him. "So what now?" He opened one eye. "Tomorrow," he said, "we prune the oncidiums," which in Wolfe language meant back to order, back to routine. The world spins on, but the brownstone remains intact. I nodded, pulled out my notebook, and scribbled one final line on the last page of the case log. Case closed, disappearance resolved, legacy preserved. Fritz came in with coffee and a tray of almond cookies, and we settled into the kind of peace that only Wolfe can create, earned, exact, and uninterrupted. Outside, the city was just getting started. But inside, the last word had been spoken, and that was all that mattered.